The Sterling mansion stood tall at the edge of the city, surrounded by high walls and silent gardens. From the outside it looked like a dream house. White marble walls, golden gates, and fountains that sparkled in the sunlight. But behind those beautiful doors lived a sadness that no one could see. The mansion was quiet, too quiet, like it was holding its breath. Servants came and went, each one leaving with tears in their eyes and fear in their hearts. Everyone in town had heard the rumors. They said the billionaire's daughter, Clara Sterling, was impossible to deal with. They said she screamed, threw things, and made every maid quit. Some called her spoiled. Others whispered that she was cursed. But the truth was something no one truly knew, something hidden deep inside her heart. Clara was only 16, but her eyes carried the weight of someone who had lived through storms. Her father, Richard Sterling, was one of the richest men in the city. He owned companies, hotels, and buildings all over the world. Yet, for all his power, he could not control the sadness that lived under his own roof. 2 years ago, tragedy had entered their home like a thief in the night. Clara's mother, Amelia Sterling, had died in a car accident on a cold winter evening. It had happened just hours after Clara had shouted at her mother for missing her school art show. Those were the last words she had spoken to her. Since then, Clara had changed. The cheerful, kind girl who once painted sunsets and baked cookies with her mother was gone. In her place was someone cold, angry, and lost. She yelled at maids, broke furniture, and destroyed everything that reminded her of happiness. Her father had tried to hire therapists, tutors, and housekeepers, but no one could reach her heart. Every maid who entered the Sterling mansion left within days. Some left because of the shouting, others because of fear. Clara would mock them, throw paint at them, or order them to do impossible tasks. "You're all the same," she would say coldly. Fake smiles, fake care. Just leave. The mansion soon became known as the House of Fear. Agencies stopped sending workers there. The garden grew wild because no one stayed long enough to take care of it. The air inside was heavy with grief and silence. Richard would leave early for work and come home late, avoiding his daughter's anger because he didn't know how to face it. He loved her, but she had built a wall so high that even a father's love couldn't climb it. Sometimes Clara sat alone in her mother's old studio, the room where sunlight once danced on the walls. Now it was dark and dusty. She would touch her mother's paintbrushes with trembling hands, then throw them across the room, tears burning in her eyes. "Why did you leave me?" she would whisper. "Why did you go that day?" But no answer ever came. Only silence. Only the ticking of the old clock her mother had loved. Every night when the world outside was asleep, Clara would hide under her blanket and cry softly. No one saw that side of her. No one knew how much she hated herself for what she said that day. To everyone else, she was just the spoiled daughter of a billionaire, but inside she was a child drowning in guilt. One morning another maid left crying. Richard stood by the front door, rubbing his tired face. "That's the 7th one this month," he sighed to the butler. "What am I supposed to do now?" The butler hesitated. "Sir, maybe Miss Clara doesn't need a maid. Maybe she needs someone who won't give up." Richard looked up, his eyes weary. "And where will I find such a person?" The butler didn't answer, but somewhere beyond the high gates, life was already preparing to send them an answer. Because sometimes healing doesn't come dressed in wealth or perfection. Sometimes it knocks on the door wearing old shoes and a humble smile. But Clara Sterling didn't know that yet. For now the mansion remained cold, the window shut, and her heart locked away, waiting for the day when someone brave enough would walk in and refuse to walk out. The next morning, sunlight slipped through the mansion windows, but it couldn't bring warmth inside. The house looked alive, yet it was cold, like a body without a soul. Clara sat at the long breakfast table, her eyes fixed on her untouched food. The silence between her and her father was heavier than words. Richard Sterling tried to smile. "Good morning, sweetheart," he said softly, hoping for a different start to the day. Clara didn't look at him. "Why do you even bother?" she muttered. "You're never here anyway." The words stabbed him like knives. He wanted to explain how he worked so hard to make sure she had everything, how he stayed up late staring at her old photos. But the words always died before they reached his lips. He had lost his wife, and now he was losing his daughter too. When he left for the office, Clara pushed her plate away and went upstairs to her room. The maids were gone again, the halls empty. She passed by her mother's painting on the wall, Amelia smiling, holding a bouquet of white roses. Clara stopped for a moment, her eyes filling with tears. Then she turned away sharply as if the memory burned too much. Inside her room, she slammed the door and fell on her bed. She stared at the ceiling, lost in her thoughts. Every corner of that mansion reminded her of her mother. The perfume scent still lingered in the closet. The old music box still played her favorite tune. But instead of comfort, it brought pain. In her heart, Clara carried a heavy secret, the guilt that ate her from the inside. On the day of the accident, she had fought with her mother. Amelia had promised to come to her school art show but didn't arrive on time. When she finally came home, breathless and smiling, Clara had shouted, "You never care. You only love your work." Those were her last words to her mother before Amelia drove out again to pick up a cake for her daughter. The car never returned. That single memory haunted Clara every single day. She remembered her mother's smile, the sound of her voice, and then the news, the sirens, the hospital bed. Everything had turned into silence and regret. She blamed herself. She believed she didn't deserve love anymore. So she turned her pain into anger. She destroyed everything before it could hurt her first. Every time someone showed kindness, she pushed them away. Every time someone tried to help, she broke their spirit. She thought if she could make everyone leave, she would never be hurt again. But deep inside, she was just scared. Scared of losing someone again. Scared of caring. Scared of feeling. Sometimes, late at night, she walked into her mother's studio. The room was locked most of the time, but Clara kept a small key hidden under her pillow. The studio was still the same. Half-finished paintings, brushes, and the smell of paint. Her mother had been an artist, full of light and laughter. She used to say, "Paint your feelings, Clara, don't hide them." Now, Clara sat in that same room and whispered to the air, "I can't, Mom. I don't know how anymore." Her voice trembled as she traced her fingers over her mother's last painting, a canvas showing the sunrise. She had never finished it. Outside, the world moved on. The garden grew wild, the fountains cracked, and dust gathered on every corner. Inside, Clara was frozen in time, still that girl who had shouted words she could never take back. Her father tried everything. He brought gifts, flowers, and expensive things, but nothing reached her heart. Once he even sat at her door for hours hoping she would talk, but she never opened it. He told himself he was doing his best, but deep down he knew he was failing. He was too afraid to face her pain, and too busy to show her his own. That night, as a storm rolled over the city, Richard sat in his study, staring at a list of names, people he had hired, people who had left. He sighed heavily. "There must be someone," he whispered. "Someone who can help her." Lightning flashed outside the window, lighting up the mansion for a moment. It was as if fate was listening, waiting, because far away on the other side of the city, a man named James Carter, a quiet veteran with tired eyes and a kind soul, was looking at a newspaper ad. He read the words carefully. "Housekeeper needed. Sterling Mansion urgent." He folded the paper, took a deep breath, and whispered, "Maybe it's time." He didn't know it yet, but his footsteps were about to change everything inside that lonely house, and inside the heart of a broken girl. Rain poured heavily that morning, turning the mansion's driveway into a river of silver. The sky was dark and thunder rolled like a warning. Inside, Richard Sterling sat in his study, reading resignation letters from yet another maid who had left without notice. His shoulders drooped, his eyes hollow from sleepless nights. He rubbed his forehead and whispered, "I can build empires, but I can't fix my own home." Just then, the doorbell rang. a deep, slow sound that echoed through the empty halls. The butler hurried to open it, his steps careful on the marble floor. When the heavy door swung open, a tall man stood outside, soaked from the rain. His clothes were simple, his boots worn, and his eyes, dark and calm, carried the weight of many untold stories. "I'm here for the housekeeping position," the man said quietly. His voice was steady, respectful. The butler blinked in surprise. "You? You were a soldier, weren't you?" "Yes, sir. James Carter, U.S. Army, retired." He handed over a folder of documents, service records, references, and a letter from the Veterans Office. "I saw the ad in the paper. Thought I'd give it a try." The butler hesitated. A soldier working as a maid? It sounded strange. But there was something in James's calmness that demanded respect. He led him to Richard's study. Richard looked up from his papers as James entered. "You're here for the maid's job?" he asked, his tone full of disbelief. James nodded. "Once. Yes, sir. I'm not here for charity. I just need honest work." Richard studied him for a moment. There were scars on his hands, a faint limp in his walk, and a quiet strength in his posture. "You know what you're asking for, Mr. Carter. My daughter has made every worker run away." "I've faced worse than shouting," James replied gently. "I've seen fear, loss, and pain. Maybe I can handle a bit of anger." There was silence for a moment, broken only by the sound of rain outside. Richard finally sighed and said, "If you can stay a week, I'll double your pay." James smiled faintly. "Deal." The butler showed him around the mansion. Everything was grand but lifeless. Dust covered the shelves, the chandeliers needed cleaning, and the air felt heavy. It wasn't the kind of mess that came from dirt. It was the kind that came from sadness. When James entered the kitchen, he saw broken plates in the trash, half-eaten food on the counter, and paint stains on the floor. He cleaned everything slowly, humming a soft tune he used to sing to calm soldiers during the war. But upstairs, Clara Sterling had already noticed him. From her window, she saw the new worker, tall, quiet, and strange. She frowned. "Another one?" she whispered bitterly. "He'll run by tomorrow." Later that evening, she came down the stairs. Her footsteps were sharp, her eyes cold. James was wiping the dining table when she appeared behind him. "So," she said with a mocking tone, "Father finally hired a soldier to clean his palace." James didn't turn around. "A soldier knows how to clean, Miss Sterling. Dirt is the same everywhere." Clara crossed her arms. "You'll leave by morning." "They all do." He glanced at her then, his gaze calm, steady, and without fear. "Maybe," he said softly. "But until then, I'll do my job." She wasn't used to that. Everyone else looked at her with fear or pity. But this man didn't. His eyes didn't judge her. They simply saw her, as if he understood something she couldn't say. That evening, when Richard returned home, the house was clean for the first time in months. The dishes were washed, the floor polished, the air lighter. He looked at James in surprise. "You did all this already?" James smiled faintly. "Yes, sir. A clean place gives the heart some space to breathe." Clara heard that from the stairs. She rolled her eyes but said nothing. Something about him irritated her, and yet a small part of her felt something else. Something strange and unfamiliar. Respect. Late that night, as rain tapped against her window, Clara whispered to herself, "He won't last," but deep down, a quiet voice inside her said, "What if he does?" Outside, the storm slowly faded and the mansion slept. But for the first time in a long while, a small spark of change had entered its walls, carried by a man who knew the language of pain and the power of patience. The next morning, the mansion woke up to the sound of soft humming coming from the kitchen. It was James Carter already at work before sunrise. He moved quietly, cleaning each corner as if he had lived there all his life. His movements were calm, steady, and full of purpose. Clara Sterling watched from the staircase, her arms crossed. She didn't like him. His calmness annoyed her. Every maid before him had either cried or quit after her anger. But this man, he seemed unshakable. She decided to test him. As he arranged the breakfast table, she walked in, wearing her usual expression of boredom mixed with bitterness. "You missed a spot," she said sharply, pointing at the table. James looked where she pointed. There was nothing there. Still, he wiped it again without a word. Clara smirked. "You're not very smart, are you?" "Maybe not," he replied simply. "But I try to learn fast." His calm tone made her even more irritated. She wanted him to lose control, to shout at her, to prove he was just like everyone else, fake and fragile. So she picked up a glass of juice and spilled it across the clean table. "There," she said coldly. "Now you can clean again." James stood still for a moment, then quietly fetched a cloth and began to clean the mess. His silence only made her angrier. "Why don't you say something?" she snapped. "Are you scared of me?" He looked up, his eyes steady. "No, Miss Sterling. I've seen real fear. This is not it." For a second, Clara froze. His words hit her heart like a quiet echo. She turned away quickly, pretending not to care. But her hands were trembling slightly. The next few days became a silent war between them. Clara threw little tests his way, spilling food, shouting orders, even hiding his cleaning tools. But James never lost his patience. He cleaned what needed cleaning, fixed what was broken, and never once raised his voice. One morning when she found her favorite vase missing, she stormed into the kitchen. "Where is it?" she yelled. James calmly looked up from polishing the counter. It was cracked. "I took it to repair. You had no right," she shouted, her voice shaking with anger. "Don't touch my things." He nodded respectfully. "I understand, miss, but broken things deserve a second chance." Just like people, she stood there speechless. No one had ever spoken to her like that. Not with anger, not with pity, but with gentle truth. She didn't know whether to scream or cry. That evening, Clara went to her room and threw herself on the bed. For the first time, she didn't feel powerful after shouting. She felt small, weak. His words kept echoing in her mind. Broken things deserve a second chance, just like people. The next day, she saw him working in the garden. It was raining lightly, but he didn't stop. His clothes were soaked, yet he continued planting flowers. Clara watched from her window, confused. No one had cared for the garden since her mother's death. She whispered to herself, "Why does he even bother?" Later, when he came back inside, dripping wet, she asked coldly, "Why are you doing all this? No one asked you to?" James smiled faintly. "Sometimes you don't need to be asked to do what's right." The garden looked lonely. It deserved care. Clara didn't reply. Her throat tightened as she turned away. She didn't want him to see the tears gathering in her eyes. Each day, something began to shift in the air. The mansion that once felt dead was slowly breathing again. The walls didn't echo with anger anymore. They echoed with quiet, steady kindness. But Clara was confused. She didn't understand this man who treated her anger with patience, who faced her cruelty with calm. It scared her. It made her feel things she had buried long ago, things like hope and warmth. That night, as she lay awake staring at the ceiling, she whispered softly, "Why aren't you leaving like the others?" Downstairs, James sat by the window sipping tea, staring out into the rain. He didn't know she was listening, but he spoke softly to the empty room as if answering her from afar. "Because some battles," he murmured, "are worth staying for." And in that silent, sleeping mansion, something began to heal, slowly, quietly, like a wounded heart learning to beat again. Days turned into weeks, and the Sterling mansion no longer felt completely lifeless. There was still silence, but it was softer now, not heavy like before. The air felt lighter. The walls seemed to breathe again. And slowly, without realizing it, Clara Sterling began to watch James Carter more closely. She noticed little things about him, the way he folded napkins with perfect care, how he whistled old tunes while sweeping the floor, how he sometimes paused to stare out the window, lost in thoughts of a world far away. One morning, Clara came down for breakfast and found James in the dining hall, polishing silver spoons. She sat down silently, expecting him to leave like every other worker used to, but he didn't. Instead, he said politely, "Good morning, Miss Sterling." She looked up, surprised. No one had greeted her that kindly in months. "You don't have to talk to me," she said coldly. "I know," James replied calmly, "but manners are free." Clara wanted to roll her eyes, but instead, she bit her lip to hide the small smile that tried to appear. She didn't want to smile. She didn't want to feel anything. Feelings hurt. Later that day, she found him repairing the old swing in the backyard, her mother's favorite spot. "Why are you fixing that?" she asked from the doorway. James turned, his hands covered in grease and dust. "Because it's broken." "It's been broken for 2 years," she said quietly. He looked at her, a soft sadness in his eyes. "Then it's waited long enough." Something in his words made her chest ache. For the first time in a long while, Clara didn't reply with anger. She simply watched him work, his strong hands moving carefully, patiently, as if every nail mattered. When he was done, he sat on the swing and motioned for her to try. She hesitated, then walked over slowly. The seat creaked a little as she sat, the ropes holding her weight gently. For a moment, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. The soft memory of her mother's laughter echoing in the garden. James stood nearby, silent. He didn't need to say anything. The quiet was enough. That evening, Clara came into the kitchen while James was cleaning up. "Were you really a soldier?" she asked suddenly. He nodded. "Yes, ma'am. A long time ago. Did you kill people?" Her voice trembled slightly. He paused, then said softly, "War isn't about killing, Miss Sterling. It's about surviving. About losing people you care about and still finding a reason to wake up the next day." Clara looked at him for a long time. His eyes were deep, filled with pain but also peace, like someone who had walked through fire and found light again. "Did you lose someone?" she asked. "Yes," he said simply. "Good men. Good friends." There was silence. Clara didn't know why, but she wanted to say something comforting. Instead, she whispered, "I lost someone too." James nodded gently. "I know." Her throat tightened. "How could you know?" He smiled, sadly. "Because anger that deep only comes from love that strong." Clara looked down, her hands trembling. For the first time in 2 years, someone had understood her without her needing to explain. It scared her, and comforted her at the same time. The next morning, when James came to the kitchen, there was a cup of tea waiting for him on the table. A small note lay beside it, written in delicate handwriting. "Thank you for fixing the swing." James smiled, the corners of his eyes softening. He didn't say anything to her, but from that day on, there was an unspoken connection between them. He didn't treat her like a spoiled girl, and she didn't treat him like a servant. She started asking small questions about his travels, the places he had seen, and the stars he used to watch while camping with his team. He answered with gentle humor and sometimes even made her laugh. It wasn't much, but it was a start. A crack in the wall she had built around her heart. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the garden in gold, Clara stood by the swing again. The wind brushed her hair as she whispered to herself, "Maybe broken things really can be fixed." From the balcony above, James saw her smiling softly, and for the first time, he felt hope too. Neither of them knew it yet, but that fragile connection would soon turn into something powerful, something that would heal both their hearts. It was a gray, rainy afternoon when the memories finally became too heavy for Clara Sterling to carry alone. The sound of raindrops on the windows reminded her of the night everything had changed, the night her mother had left and never come back. She sat in her mother's old studio, surrounded by untouched paintings and brushes covered in dust. The air smelled faintly of oil paint and loneliness. Her trembling fingers traced the edge of a canvas that had never been finished, a sunrise her mother had started painting 2 years ago. Tears welled in her eyes. "Why did you go, Mom?" she whispered softly. Why did I say those words? Behind her, the door creaked open. James Carter stood there quietly, holding a tray with tea. He didn't speak right away. He just watched the fragile girl sitting in a room full of ghosts. "I thought you might need something warm," he said gently. Clara quickly wiped her tears and turned away. "I'm fine." James walked closer and placed the tray on a small table. "No one is fine in an empty room, Miss Sterling." His calm voice broke through her walls again, the same way it always did. She sighed and whispered, "You shouldn't be here." He nodded. "You're right. But sometimes people need someone to sit with them in their silence." She looked up at him, her eyes red and tired. For a long time neither of them spoke. The rain outside filled the silence between them. Then, suddenly, Clara said, "It was my fault." James frowned softly. "What was?" "My mother's death," she said, her voice shaking. She died because of me." James sat down across from her, his face calm but full of understanding. "Tell me what happened." Clara took a deep breath, her voice trembling as she began. "It was the day of my art show at school. I'd worked on a painting for weeks and she promised she'd come. But she was late. I waited and waited, and when she finally got home I shouted at her. I told her she didn't care about me. I told her I hated her." Tears streamed down her face as her voice broke. "She went out again that evening to buy me a cake. I never got to say sorry. The police came that night. They said there was an accident. She didn't make it." Her body shook with sobs, her pain spilling out after years of silence. "Every time I see her picture, I remember my words. I told her I hated her, James. I told her that before she died." James didn't try to stop her tears. He simply let her cry, his heart aching for the broken girl in front of him. After a while, he said quietly, "I know what guilt feels like." Clara looked up at him, her eyes filled with confusion. He took a slow breath. "In the war, I was the team leader. One night, I gave an order to move forward. I thought it was safe. But I was wrong. My best friend Marcus was caught in crossfire. He didn't come back," he paused, his voice low. "I carried that guilt for years. I thought if I had made a different choice, he would still be alive." Clara listened silently. For the first time, she saw pain in his eyes, too. Not just patience, but a deep wound. He continued, "Guilt never goes away completely, Clara. But it doesn't mean we're bad people. It means we still care. It means we still love." She wiped her tears, her voice barely a whisper. "How did you move on?" "I didn't, not at first," he said softly. "But I learned something. The people we lose don't want us to live in pain. They want us to live in peace. Every time I fix something broken, every time I help someone smile, I feel like I honor the ones I lost." Clara's lips trembled. "I don't think I can forgive myself." James reached out, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Then let her forgive you through me. She wouldn't want you to hide from life, Clara. She'd want you to paint again, to smile again, to live." The tears in her eyes fell freely now, but they were different. Softer, lighter, full of release. For the first time in 2 years, she didn't feel completely alone. When she looked at James, she saw more than just a man fixing broken things. She saw someone who understood the kind of pain words couldn't explain. As the rain outside began to fade, Clara whispered, "Thank you for not leaving." James smiled gently. Some doors, Miss Sterling, are worth knocking on twice, and in that quiet moment, surrounded by her mother's paintings and the faint smell of paint, something inside Clara finally began to heal. Weeks passed after that rainy afternoon, and the mansion no longer felt like a cage. Sunlight once again filled the long, cold hallways. The staff whispered in surprise. Miss Sterling was changing. Clara woke up early now. She helped the gardener water the roses her mother had planted. She sat beside the cook and asked for recipes her mother used to love. She even painted again, soft, gentle colors that told stories of healing, not pain. Everywhere James went, she followed with quiet admiration. He never spoke much, but his silence was comforting. He had become her strength, the calm voice that guided her back to life. One afternoon, while James was polishing the antique piano in the living room, Clara entered carrying a small painting. Her eyes sparkled with nervous excitement. "I finished it," she said softly. James turned to look. The painting showed a sunrise, bright orange light breaking through dark clouds. In the corner stood two figures, a young girl and an older man, both standing before an open door. "It's beautiful," he whispered. "What do you call it?" She smiled shyly. "The door that stayed open." James looked at her, understanding the meaning hidden behind the title. She no longer wanted to close herself off from the world. She had learned that even after loss, life still had ways to enter. Through kindness, through forgiveness, through courage. Later that evening, her father returned home from a long business trip. Mr. Sterling, a powerful billionaire known for his cold demeanor, stopped at the doorway in shock. He saw his daughter laughing with the man he had hired only as a housekeeper. Clara ran toward him, her eyes shining. "Dad!" He froze for a moment. It had been years since she had greeted him with that warmth. "Clara?" he whispered. "I missed you," she said, hugging him tightly. For the first time in years, he hugged her back. At dinner, the house felt alive again. Clara spoke softly but with genuine joy. She told her father about James, how he fixed the clocks, the garden, and somehow her heart too. Mr. Sterling studied James silently. The veteran sat humbly, his eyes respectful, his tone calm. There was something about him that earned quiet respect without asking for it. After dinner, Mr. Sterling asked to speak with him privately in his study. "Mr. Carter," he began in his usual stern tone, "I hired you to manage the staff, not to change my daughter's life." James met his gaze steadily. "Sir, I didn't change her. She chose to heal. I just stayed long enough for her to believe she could." Mr. Sterling was silent for a long moment. Then he said quietly, "You've done more for her than any doctor or teacher ever did." James nodded politely. "Sometimes, sir, all a person needs is someone who listens." The next morning, James packed his bag. He had already decided it was time to leave. His work here was done, and he never liked staying where peace had already been restored. When Clara found out, she ran to the driveway. "You're leaving?" she cried. James turned, his expression soft but sad. "You don't need me anymore, Miss Sterling. You've learned to stand again." Tears filled her eyes. "But you're my friend," he smiled warmly. "And I always will be. But life keeps moving. There are other doors waiting for me to knock on." Clara's voice trembled. "Can I at least give you something?" She held out the small painting, the door that stayed open. "So you never forget what you helped me do." James took it gently, his fingers brushing against hers. "I won't forget," he promised. "Every sunrise reminds me that even after darkness, light finds a way back." As he walked down the long driveway, the morning sun broke through the clouds. Clara stood watching until he disappeared around the corner, clutching her heart and smiling through her tears. Months later, her father entered the art gallery at her first public exhibition. The largest painting on display caught his eye, a portrait of a man standing before a grand door, light shining behind him. The plaque beneath it read, "To the man who taught me how to open my heart again." Clara Sterling. Her father felt his eyes grow misty. He looked around the bright, beautiful room filled with laughter, art, and love.